The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the red clay road as Amara stepped out of the taxi, a small bag in her hand and sorrow written on her face. The air smelled of dust, old wood, and memories, the kind that never really fade. It had been years since she'd last come home to her grandmother's house, the house that raised generations, the one that still stood tall at the edge of Mbano village, with its cracked veranda and fading blue paint. Now, her grandmother was gone. As Amara pushed open the gate, its hinges groaned, almost as if the house itself sighed at her return. The compound felt heavy, not just with silence, but with history. The ancestral masks that lined the veranda walls seemed to watch her every move. The scent of palm oil and old incense lingered in the air, whispering of prayers once said and secrets once kept. Inside, everything looked untouched. The same worn furniture, the same family portraits hanging slightly crooked on the walls. Her grandmother's chair still sat by the window, draped with the same shawl she used to wear when she told evening stories. Amara's eyes landed on one thing, the wooden chest in the corner of the room. It was large, carved from dark mahogany, sealed tight with a rusted iron lock. She remembered that chest from childhood, how her cousins used to dare each other to touch it. No one ever did. Everyone in the family called it the chest of silence. It had always been off limits. Even as a child, Amara could feel something strange about it. A pull, a mystery that frightened her. Her Aunt Abeli, who was arranging flowers on the table, noticed Amara's eyes on the chest. She straightened slowly and said in a low, firm voice, "Don't go near it, Amara. Your grandmother never wanted anyone to open that chest. Some truths," she paused, her eyes dark and tired, "are better buried." Amara nodded faintly, but her gaze didn't move. Later that evening, after everyone had left and the house fell silent, Amara sat alone in the living room. A soft lamp flickered beside her, throwing gentle light over the portraits. She studied them. Her mother as a young woman, her grandmother standing proudly beside her, and a few faces she didn't recognize. Her heart ached. She thought about how strong her grandmother had been, how she ruled the family with wisdom and iron will, but also how she carried sadness behind her stern eyes. The wind outside rustled the curtains. Amara turned again toward the chest. Its carved patterns seemed to shift in the dim light, almost like it was alive, breathing secrets. She whispered softly, "What are you hiding from me?" For a moment, she thought she heard something, a faint echo, like the whisper of her grandmother's voice. But when she turned around, there was only silence. The weight of grief pressed on her chest, and tears finally spilled down her cheeks. She had always wanted to understand her grandmother, to know why she was so strict, why she avoided certain questions, why she never spoke about Amara's grandfather. Now, all those questions burned stronger than ever. That night, Amara lay in her grandmother's old bed. The ceiling fan creaked slowly above her as she drifted into a restless sleep. In her dream, the house was alive, the walls breathing, the portraits watching. The chest sat in the middle of the room, glowing faintly. Then her grandmother appeared, her eyes soft, her face calm but serious. She reached out her wrinkled hand and whispered, "Find the truth before it finds you." Amara jolted awake, her heart racing, her skin cold with sweat. The wind howled outside as rain began to fall. She sat up in the darkness, staring toward the corner of the room where the chest waited. Silent, ancient, patient. Whatever secret it held had just called her name. The morning after the storm, The house stood still under a gray sky. Drops of rain clung to the windows, and the air smelled of wet earth and wood polish. Amara moved quietly through the house, her bare feet brushing against the cool tiles. Her grandmother's home, once full of laughter and cooking aromas, now echoed with emptiness. Every creak in the floor reminded her that this house had seen more than she ever knew. She decided to clean, not just because the dust had gathered, but because she needed something to do. Something to calm the unease that had settled in her chest since the dream. She began in the living room. The family portraits seemed to follow her with their painted smiles. The one of her grandmother stood in the center, proud and strong, wrapped in traditional Ankara, her eyes steady. But just beside it hung a picture she had never really noticed before. It was faint, almost hidden behind the others, a photograph of 3 people: her mother, her grandmother, and a tall man whose face had been torn in half. Amara froze. She reached up and took the picture down. The tear through the man's face looked deliberate, not accidental. On the back of the photo, written in faded ink, were the words, "For my love, always." Her heart thumped. She whispered, "Who are you?" For a moment, she thought she could almost hear voices. Faint, like echoes from the past. Suddenly, a memory came rushing back. She was 10 years old again, hiding behind the kitchen door, listening to her mother and grandmother arguing, her mother's voice trembling with anger. "You promised you'd tell her one day." Her grandmother's reply, sharp and cold. "Some truths destroy, Ngozi. Let her grow in peace." The young Amara had not understood it then. She only remembered the fear in her mother's eyes, and how her grandmother had slammed the door shut, cutting the argument and the truth in half. Now, standing in that same house as a grown woman, Amara felt that same door still closed inside her. The sound of footsteps broke her thoughts. It was Mama Nkechi, the elderly neighbor and her grandmother's old friend. She carried a small bowl of yam porridge, her eyes kind but knowing. "My child," Mama Nkechi said softly, placing the bowl on the table. "It's good you came home. This house has missed you." Amara smiled faintly. "I've missed it too." But Mama Nkechi didn't smile back. Her gaze wandered toward the wooden chest in the corner. She sighed heavily and murmured, almost to herself, "Your grandmother's sins were not hers alone." Amara blinked. "What do you mean?" But Mama Nkechi only shook her head and muttered, "Let the past rest, child. Some stories bring only pain." Then she turned and left, her slippers brushing softly against the wet earth outside. Amara stood frozen, her hands trembling. That one line, "Not hers alone," echoed in her mind like a drumbeat. She turned toward the chest again. The storm from last night had quieted, but inside her, another one was beginning to rise. When Aunt Ebili returned from the market later that afternoon, Amara couldn't hold it in any longer. She showed her the torn photograph. "Auntie," she said, voice low, "who is this man?" Ebili's face changed instantly. Her hands stopped moving. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, in a trembling voice, she whispered, "Where did you find that?" "In the photo frame," Amara replied. "Why was his face torn?" Her aunt looked at her long and hard, a mixture of fear and anger clouding her eyes. Finally, she turned away. "Amara, don't go looking for answers that bring pain. That man, he doesn't belong to our story anymore." Amara took a step closer. "But I need to know." Ebili's tone sharpened. "No, you don't. Leave it. Leave the chest. Leave the past. It will only break you." Her aunt's voice cracked as she spoke, her eyes glistening. Then she walked out, before Amara could say another word. The silence that followed felt heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. Outside, dark clouds began to gather again. The wind howled, sweeping through the open windows, making the curtains dance like restless spirits. Amara lit a small lantern as thunder rumbled in the distance. The light flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. Her eyes drifted toward the chest once more. She could almost feel its presence, like it was calling her. She knelt beside it, her fingers tracing the carvings along the lid. Symbols of suns, rivers, and birds. Her grandmother had once said those carvings protected what was sacred. Her heart beat faster. Everything. The torn photo, Mama Nkechi's words, her aunt's fear, all pointed toward one thing. The secret was inside this chest. Lightning flashed through the window, and thunder roared so loud that it shook the floor. The lantern flickered, then steadied again, Amara whispered, her voice breaking through the storm. I deserve to know. She pressed her palm against the cool wood, her reflection trembling in the lantern's glass. For the first time, she didn't look away. In that moment, it wasn't just curiosity. It was destiny. The truth her family had buried for decades was beginning to rise, like thunder before the rain. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind a silence so deep that even the birds stayed quiet. The world outside shimmered with dew. But inside the old house, a different kind of tension hung in the air. One that pressed against Amara's chest like a weight. She hadn't slept much. The words from her dream, "Find the truth before it finds you," still echoed in her mind. As the pale morning light crept through the curtains, Amara stood in front of the family portraits, her fingers brushing against the one of her grandmother. There was something about the way her grandmother's eyes seemed to follow her. Proud, stern, almost guiding. That's when she noticed it. A small frame hung slightly crooked on the wall, the only one that seemed out of place. She lifted it carefully, and as she did, something metallic clinked behind it. Her breath caught. She reached behind the frame and pulled out a rusted old key, its edges worn, its surface stained with age. For a long moment, she just stared at it in disbelief. Then her gaze shifted toward the wooden chest in the corner of the room. The chest of silence. Her heartbeat quickened. Every step toward it felt like walking toward the unknown. She knelt beside it, the key trembling in her hand. She hesitated. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something deeper. The feeling that once she turned that key, nothing would ever be the same again. But she had to know. The lock clicked after years of silence, the sound sharp and final. Slowly, Amara lifted the lid. The hinges groaned, the wood creaked, and the smell of old paper and dust filled the air. Inside, there wasn't gold or jewels or anything valuable, only a collection of letters, tied together with faded ribbon, a faded photograph folded neatly beside them, and a cloth bundle, darkened with old, dried blood. Amara's breath trembled as she lifted the letters first. The handwriting was elegant and careful, each stroke filled with emotion. She began to read. My dearest Adaeze, her grandmother's name. Even if the world turns against us, know that my love for you will not die. They can silence my voice, but not the truth of what we shared. Amara blinked back tears as she turned to the next page, her heart pounding faster with every word. The letters spoke of love and fear, of a man named Obina, who was hunted for his beliefs, branded a rebel by the government. The letters told of secret meetings by the river, of whispered promises, and of a child never to be acknowledged. Her hands shook as she unfolded the photograph. It was clearer than she expected. Her grandmother, younger, standing beside a tall man with kind eyes and a strong face. The same man from the torn photo, the man whose name had been erased from her family's story. Then came the final blow, the letter dated just days before Obina's death. If they take me, promise me you will protect her, our child, from this cruel world. Let her live even if my name must die. Tears blurred Amara's vision. She reached deeper into the chest and found a document, an old birth certificate. Her hands froze when she read the name listed under Father, Obinna Okafor. Her voice cracked in disbelief. No, that can't be. Her grandmother's husband, the man everyone called grandfather, wasn't her mother's real father. Everything her family had built its pride upon, its honor, its legacy, had been built on a lie. Her chest ached, as if her heart were splitting open. She wanted to scream, to cry, to ask why. She reached for the cloth bundle. The fabric was stiff, stained dark brown with old blood. With trembling fingers, she unwrapped it. Inside lay a rusted pendant, simple but beautiful, engraved with the letters O.O. Obinna Okafor. Amara held the pendant in her palm, feeling the weight of her family's silence pressing down on her. She imagined her grandmother, young, in love, and terrified, a woman forced to bury her truth for the sake of survival. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "You loved him, and they took him from you." The air around her felt different, heavy, yet peaceful. The truth had finally spoken, even if it came through dust and tears. Amara sat back against the wall, clutching the pendant to her heart. For the first time, she understood. The chest wasn't a curse. It was a grave of love, a prison of memories, and a testament to pain that had never been healed. But one question burned inside her now, fiercer than ever. Why had everyone, her mother, her aunt, kept this secret buried? The truth she had uncovered was only half the story, and she was ready for the rest. The sun had climbed high when Amara finally left her grandmother's old room. She carried the pendant in her hand, and the letters pressed tightly to her chest. Every step she took through the silent house echoed like a heartbeat. In the living room, Aunt Ifeoma sat at the edge of the couch, hands clasped, eyes red. She didn't look surprised to see Amara, as if she had been waiting. Amara stopped in front of her. Her voice was low, trembling with emotion. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ifeoma's lips parted, but no words came. Her gaze dropped to the pendant in Amara's hand, and tears instantly filled her eyes. "You found it," she whispered. Amara nodded slowly. "I found everything. The letters, the photo, the truth about grandmother and Obinna Okafor." For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Then, finally, Ifeoma stood. Her face was lined with years of secrets, but there was something tender in her eyes, something that spoke of guilt and love all at once. "You have no idea what it cost us to keep that secret," she said softly. "Your grandmother's heart was buried long before her body was." Amara clenched her jaw. "You lied to me my whole life." "We protected you," Ifeoma said quickly. "We protected all of us." Amara's voice cracked. "From what?" Ifeoma took a deep breath, walked to the window, and pulled aside the curtain. Outside, the wide expanse of the old compound lay silent under the blazing sun. "Let me tell you," she said, "so you'll understand what silence cost this family." Flashback. 1965. Eastern Nigeria. The world was different then. Darker, divided by war and fear. Adaeze, Amara's grandmother, was barely 20 when she met Obinna Okafor, a young teacher who spoke of freedom and equality. He came to the village with books and ideals, his laughter bright as the morning sun. She had been promised to another man, a wealthy trader chosen by her father to secure their family's social standing. But when she met Obinna, she saw something she had never seen before: kindness that didn't demand obedience. They met in secret, by the river, under the mango trees, in the shadow of a world that would never accept them. And soon, Adaeze was carrying his child. When her father found out, he was furious. "You have shamed this family," he had thundered. But Adaeze refused to name the father. She protected Obina, even when soldiers came looking for him, calling him a traitor for speaking against the government. The night they came for him, Adaeze hid him inside the barn behind the house. The soldiers beat her father, searched every corner, but found nothing. When they left, Obina emerged, wounded but alive. He pressed the pendant, his mother's heirloom, into Adaeze's hand. "If they take me, keep this," he said. "So you'll remember that my love was real." Days later, he was captured and executed without trial. Adaeze broke that night. Her father forced her to marry the traitor, and when she gave birth months later, the man accepted the child as his own, but only if Obina's name was erased forever. To protect her child, Adaeze agreed, and thus began the curse of silence, a silence that would shape generations. Every letter, every photograph, every trace of Obina was locked away in the chest. The world believed the lie. The truth became poison, whispered only in guilt and tears. Back to present day Amara sat frozen, tears streaming down her face. "So my grandmother lived her whole life pretending," she whispered. "Pretending," Ifeoma said, nodding, "and bleeding inside for it." Amara looked down at the pendant again. "Then why keep it hidden from me?" "From everyone?" Ifeoma sighed deeply, her voice shaking. "Because the world hasn't changed as much as you think. Your grandmother's truth was dangerous then, and it's inconvenient now. Our family built its reputation on wealth, respect, and legacy. What would happen if people learned that legacy was born from rebellion and scandal?" Her words cut deep. Amara rose to her feet, fury and heartbreak twisting inside her. "So you chose pride over peace, lies over truth?" Ifeoma looked up at her niece, her eyes filled with years of regret. "We chose survival, Amara. Sometimes silence isn't cowardice, it's protection." But Amara shook her head. "No, it's a prison." She turned and walked toward the old chest, still open on the floor. The sunlight streamed through the windows now, bathing the dust in golden light. Amara knelt beside it and began carefully laying the letters back inside. But this time, she did it differently. Gently, like one burying something sacred, not hiding something shameful. Then she placed the pendant on top and whispered, "You don't have to hide anymore." When she looked back, Aunt Ifeoma stood there silently, tears glistening in her eyes. For the first time, she didn't try to stop Amara. "What will you do now?" she asked softly. Amara's gaze was steady. "Tell the truth. All of it." The air in the house shifted. Lighter now, freer. Somewhere outside, a bird began to sing again. For the first time in generations, the silence was broken. But as Amara looked out toward the horizon, she couldn't shake the feeling that this truth, long buried, would have consequences far beyond what she could imagine. The curse of silence had been lifted, but not without awakening something that had been waiting to be heard. The next morning, the sky hung low and gray over the village, the kind of morning that felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Amara woke before dawn. She hadn't slept much, but her decision was already made. The truth could no longer stay locked inside that wooden chest. The silence had lasted too long, and it had cost too much. She sat by the window, staring at the pendant lying on the table beside her. Obina Okafor's initials glinting faintly in the soft light. It felt like a heartbeat, small but steady, pulsing with generations of pain and love. Aunt Ifeoma entered quietly, holding a cup of tea. Her eyes looked weary but softer now, as though some invisible burden had lifted overnight. "You're really going to tell them?" she asked gently. Amara nodded. "The truth doesn't destroy families, Auntie. Secrets do. Ifeoma sighed. The world doesn't always reward truth, my child. Maybe not, Amara said. But I can't live in a lie anymore. The gathering, by midday, word had spread that Amara, granddaughter of the late Adeze, wanted to speak at the village assembly. Curiosity filled the air, whispers, glances, murmurs of speculation. The square was crowded when Amara arrived. Elders sat on wooden stools, their walking sticks planted firmly in the earth. Neighbors stood at the edges, arms folded, waiting. The weight of generations pressed down on her shoulders. She could feel the judgment even before she opened her mouth. The expectation that she, like those before her, would uphold the family's reputation. But Amara wasn't here for reputation. She was here for truth. She stepped onto the small raised platform near the old baobab tree. Her voice trembled at first, but the fire in her heart steadied her. Many of you knew my grandmother, Adeze Okoro. You called her strong, honorable, proud. But what you didn't know was the price she paid for that pride. A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. Amara held up the rusted pendant, its metal catching the sunlight. This belonged to a man named Obinna Okafor, a man who loved her, who died for his beliefs, and whose name was erased from our story because the world called him a traitor. Gasps. The elders exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, Elder Encom, frowned deeply. Careful, child, he warned. You speak of the past we buried for peace. Amara met his gaze, unflinching. Peace built on silence is not peace. It's fear. She told them everything. About the letters, the hidden chest, the truth that her grandmother had carried alone for decades. Her voice broke at times, but she didn't stop. When she finished, the silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, no one moved. Then, from the back of the crowd, a man spoke softly. My father told me about Obinna Okafor, he said. He was a good man. They killed him because he spoke truth to power. Another voice joined in. Then another. Stories began surfacing. Fragments of memory. Whispers from the past. Slowly, the narrative that had been buried began to reshape itself in the open air. But not everyone was pleased. Elder Encom slammed his walking stick against the ground. Enough. You shame your ancestors by digging up graves that should remain closed. Amara's heart pounded, but she stood firm. No, Elder. I honor them by giving them back their voices. Her words hung in the air, trembling like light through broken glass. The aftermath, when the gathering dispersed, the village buzzed with divided opinions. Some called her brave, others reckless. A few older women hugged her quietly, whispering blessings. Others turned their faces away as she passed. That night, Amara sat outside the house under a sky heavy with stars. The pendant lay warm in her hand, as though it had absorbed the heat of her courage. Aunt Ifeoma joined her, settling into the chair beside her. For a long time they said nothing. The sound of crickets filled the silence, not heavy this time, but peaceful. Finally, Ifeoma spoke. Your grandmother would be proud of you. Amara looked up at the stars. I hope so. She wanted to tell the truth, too, Ifeoma said softly. But she couldn't. The world wasn't ready then. Maybe it is now, Amara smiled faintly. Maybe. They sat together for a while, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. The same wind that once carried whispers of love and fear through this compound. For the first time in generations, it carried freedom. The letter later that night. As Amara prepared to sleep, she noticed one last envelope inside the chest. It was smaller, sealed with wax, and addressed in her grandmother's handwriting. Her heart raced as she opened it. To the one who dares to open this chest. I know you are my blood. If you found these letters, it means the time for silence has ended. I carried love and shame in equal measure, and it nearly destroyed me. But love should never be buried. It should be spoken, even if it trembles. Forgive us for our silence. Live differently. Speak loudly. Love freely. Tears spilled down Amara's cheeks as she read the last line. Remember, truth is not meant to wound. It is meant to heal. She folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the pendant on her nightstand. In that quiet moment, she felt her grandmother's presence, not in pain, but in peace. Epilogue. The New Day. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows. Children laughed outside as the village stirred to life. Amara stood at the window, her eyes bright, her heart light for the first time in years. The chest still sat in the corner, no longer a symbol of secrecy, but of strength. She had decided to donate the letters and pendant to the local heritage center, so others could know the truth, too. As she locked the door behind her and stepped into the warm morning light, she whispered, "Rest now, grandmother. The truth is free." And as the wind brushed through the trees, it seemed to answer her, soft, like a sigh of relief. For the first time in generations, the curse of silence was broken, and the weight of truth finally lifted. The sun rose softly over the red earth rooftops of Umuoba village, painting the morning in gold. Birds sang from the mango trees, and the wind carried the scent of rain-soaked soil. Amara stood at the edge of the compound, staring at the old house that had held so many secrets. Now, it was simply home. In her hands, she held the pendant and a stack of neatly folded letters. They were no longer symbols of shame, but of truth, love that had survived silence, and pain that had found its voice. Today, she wasn't just a Daisy's granddaughter. She was the keeper of a story, one that needed to be told aloud. The memorial, the village square, had been transformed. Palm fronds decorated the open space, and chairs were arranged in a circle beneath the great baobab tree. It was the same tree where, decades ago, Obina Okafor had spoken to the people about justice and hope, before he was taken away and erased from history. Now, under that same tree, his name would be spoken again. As people gathered, a quiet reverence filled the air. Old men in flowing white garments, women in colorful wrappers, and curious children stood side by side. Even the elders who once resisted her truth had come, their faces solemn but curious. Aunt Ifeoma stood beside Amara, holding her hand. "Are you ready?" she whispered. Amara smiled faintly. "I've never been more ready." She stepped forward, her voice steady, her heart full. "We are gathered here today," she began, "not to reopen wounds, but to heal them. For too long, my grandmother's love was hidden behind shame. But love, real love, does not die. It echoes through time, waiting for someone brave enough to listen." She lifted the pendant, the metal catching the light like a small flame. This belonged to Obina Okafor, a man the world called a traitor, but who my grandmother called her heart. A murmur of emotion rippled through the crowd. She read one of the letters aloud, her voice trembling. The words were simple but filled with raw beauty. "If I die, let them say I loved. Let them say I believed in something greater than fear." Tears fell quietly down Amara's cheeks as she folded the letter. Around her, some of the villagers wept too, not just for Obina, but for the truth they had buried alongside his name. When she finished, she knelt and placed the pendant and letters inside a small open box at the foot of the baobab tree. "No more locks, no more silence," she said softly. "Let this story belong to everyone." The wind rose suddenly, swirling dust and leaves in a soft spiral around her. It felt like the earth itself was sighing, releasing something it had held too long. Healing and reckoning as The ceremony ended. People approached her, some with tears, others with quiet gratitude. An old man clasped her hands. "I was a boy when they took Obinna," he said. "He was kind to everyone. We were told never to speak his name again. Thank you, my child, for giving it back to us." A woman pressed a hand to her chest. "Your grandmother was stronger than we knew. I judged her once. I was wrong." Each voice, each tear, was a piece of healing stitched into the heart of the village. Even Elder Nunkum, the one who had scolded her before, stepped forward. His eyes glistened with humility. "Sometimes the young must remind the old what truth means," he said quietly. "You have done what many of us feared to do. Your grandmother's spirit will rest now." Amara bowed her head respectfully. The final conversation. That evening, Amara sat alone under the tree as the last of the crowd disappeared into the dusk. The open box sat before her, a symbol of everything she had fought for. The air was still, filled with the sound of distant drums and crickets. For a moment, she closed her eyes, and in the hush that followed, she could almost hear her grandmother's voice, soft and warm. "You have done well, my child. You broke the silence I could not. You gave our love a name again." Amara smiled through her tears. "I didn't just do it for you, Grandma. I did it for us all." She looked up at the sky. The stars had begun to appear, one by one, shimmering like memories returning home. A new beginning. Weeks later, life in the village began to change subtly. Children played near the old house without fear. Neighbors spoke more kindly about Adaizi's name. The village library displayed the open box, letters and pendant preserved beneath clear glass, titled "The Love That Endured Silence." Visitors came from nearby towns to hear the story. Not of scandal, but of courage and redemption. And Amara? She stayed for a while, helping her aunt restore the house, repainting the walls, fixing the roof, planting flowers by the front gate. One morning, as she swept the veranda, Mama Nkichi, the old neighbor, passed by. "Your grandmother would smile if she saw this," she said, leaning on her walking stick. Amara smiled. "I think she already has." They both laughed softly, the kind of laughter that carries peace. The final scene. When the day came for Amara to return to the city, she walked through the house one last time. She paused by the chest, still sitting in the corner, its heavy lock removed. Inside were a few family keepsakes, photos, and the last note from her grandmother. She ran her hand across its wooden surface. It no longer felt cold or haunted. It felt alive, like a witness that had finally been heard. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. The air smelled of earth, hope, and rain. Amara picked up her bag and stepped into the sunlight. As she reached the gate, she turned back once more, whispering, "Rest, Grandma. Your story lives now." The camera of memory lingered on her, her figure small against the vast sky, yet strong, unbowed. The house stood behind her, glowing in the late afternoon sun, no longer burdened by silence. And as she walked down the dusty road, the sound of distant drums rose, soft, rhythmic, eternal, echoing her grandmother's name through the heart of the village. Them message. The truth may hurt, but silence destroys. Love and courage heal generations. And in that small corner of Africa, where one woman dared to open a forbidden chest, the truth finally breathed, free and everlasting.